be outside. Planting a fresh garden, fresh greens, carrots, tomatoes. I need to get out. Now I remember something about GAMP, the Great Age Movement, them doing some live streaming about the restoration of Memorial Park. Yes. Oh my goodness. There's that guy. He's getting on his bike. Perhaps he's going to see the restoration of Memorial Park. GAMP, live streaming, help. I want to get outside. Great Age Movement.
Hi, and welcome to the Great Age Movement at Home Live Lab Series in partnership with the Health Museum. And today we have a special show on Houston's most famous park, Memorial Park. And I'm here today with Carolyn White.
Hello, Carolyn White. I'm the Conservation Director at Memorial Park Conservancy. And I'm here with Fritz. I'm also on the Board of Directors of the Great Age Movement.
And we're all about seniors.
Yes.
And here we are today to shed light to the entire community on this park.
Yeah, so what I'll do is go through a few slides, give you a bit of the history of the park, and then we'll do a DIY potting up of plants.
Native plants.
Native plants. So if you go to the next slide, I'm going to talk a bit about the history of Memorial Park. It is basically a 1,500-acre urban wilderness in the middle of the city. It is twice as big as Central Park in New York City.
How big is this park?
It's 1,500 acres.
1,500 acres.
So Memorial Park Conservancy manages 1,100 of those acres.
Okay.
We have the urban, the central golf course, which is about 250 acres. We have the Houston Arboretum and Nature Center, which is another 150 acres, and that's managed by a separate organization. In it, we have playgrounds for children and many opportunities to get.
And I've done your running trail. That's there. That's expanded.
Yes.
So tell me about the mission of the organization.
Let's go to the next slide. So our mission is to restore, preserve, and enhance Memorial Park for the enjoyment of all Houstonians today and tomorrow. So the Conservancy took over management of the park in 2015 after our master plan was ratified by the City of Houston City Council.
Is that due to you already setting it up for a future major project that would benefit the community?
Yes. So we were able to have some funding come to the park through the Uptown Development Authority, as well as philanthropy in the city, to really kind of re-vision the park. And when I go through the history, you'll kind of get an understanding of why it was so important to get a master plan done for the park. So if you go to the next slide, we have a rich history with World War I being a training camp for soldiers, mostly from the Illinois area. There were at the most 30,000 soldiers living at Memorial Park in Camp Logan. There was a YMCA, there was a library, there was a Jewish community center. It was a very vibrant part of Houston.
Is this military outpost, was it designed because it's closer to like the rail system? So
Yes.
people back then
Exactly.
okay.
So the rail line was there, the one that bisects Memorial Park was there in 1917, and so it became a logical place for a training camp. Prior to that, it was a ranch, the Rhinoman Ranch. If you look at the next slide, we can see early images of Buffalo Bayou that runs for 4 miles along the southern extent of Memorial Park.
That's its true natural state.
Yeah, so back in the 1920s, there was a gentleman out of Massachusetts who came to do a master plan for the city of Houston. And after studying the environment and talking with people, he centered his plan for parkland along bayous.
Was this tied into like the philanthropists back in like I'm a hog, wanting to transform this area for the city?
Right, there was a lot of interest in parkland in the city, and some of the only parks that really got fully developed at that time was Herman Park, Memorial Park, and they are adjacent to these bayous. If you go to the next slide, you can see an early image from the 1930s of Memorial Park, and you can see how much of a grassland environment it was. So the pine trees, the loblolly pines, the oaks, they were sort of sparsely centered around a grassland environment. If you go to the next slide, we can see the aerial image.
That's massive.
Of the park in the 1940s. Of course, the park was developed in 1924 with Ima Hogg and her brothers who were able to sell the land to the city.
So this was privately owned and the city annexed it at that point?
Yes, it was various parcels that were private and some public.
Got it.
But it was consolidated in 1924 to become Memorial Park. And so you can see that it was fairly sparsely vegetated. The trees weren't as dense in the 1940s. And then if you go to the next slide, you can see in the 1950s that canopy started growing in and choking out some of that grassland that was much more native to the area. Along with that canopy cover came a lot of invasive plants that were coming out of the nursery trade. So there were many sort of undesirable plants that really choked out the native trees and the native grasses that would have been there otherwise. And then if you go to the next slide, you can see in our recent history, basically in 2010, right before the drought of 2011, 2012, it was a dense forest, really fairly impenetrable, even by the more rugged people. You know, you'd have to absolutely kind of crawl under and in between thicket to get anywhere in the park. And then in the next slide, you can see how after the drought, it was devastated. And so this precipitated the need for a master plan to really look at how we're going to re-envision the park. It was, at that point, at its lowest, you know, in terms of ecology and usability. So the 40,000 trees that were taken out during that drought were chipped up and turned into compost, which I'll talk about a bit later. And then the master plan, if you look at the next slide, was based around sort of an ecological restoration. We were going to consolidate and connect some of those habitats that were degraded and isolated prior to that drought era. And then in the next slide, you can see an image of the master plan. That's kind of like the full rendering of the build out of the full master plan. And
these are your tenants?
Yes, so we have basically these 5 guiding principles for the master plan. And it's to restore the park ecology and the parkland, consolidate and get like uses together, the sports complex together, consolidate some of those habitats, tend to those habitats and the ecologies, as well as the physical plants and the facilities, and then reconnect over Memorial Drive and really allow the seamless experience from the wilderness down by Buffalo Bayou up into the heart of the park. And then the enhancement of the overall experience for all Houstonians and the wildlife. If you go to the next slide, you can see these park ecologies that we're sort of shooting towards. What we're looking to create is taking those remnant prairie locations along the railroad and in the center point easement and enhancing those and preserving those. We're going to be developing, you know, sort of this upland pine hardwood forest that's much more conducive to sustainable regrowth in the case of some sort of devastation like a drought or a fire.
But it's incredible to live in such a dense population within the loop of Houston and have this access to the wilderness.
Yes.
You know, you generally have to travel hours to get somewhere. Here we are being able to invest our time and energy. in the
Yes, and right in the middle of the park, we have a big 2-acre wetland, which is part of the Eastern Glades project. So the next slide shows our next 10 years. We are finishing up the Eastern Glades, which is actually just opened this week. Our next project is the Land Bridge and Prairie project over Memorial Drive. We're finishing up the first phase of the sports complex also this month. And then we'll work on the running trail complex as well as the memorial groves that are up along the railroad tracks. Along with it are these connecting trails. So we have the Southern Arc Trail that goes through the southern part of the park into the wilderness areas. It's all ADA compliant, as well as the major trail along the Center Point easement.
When
near
you
the
say
railroad.
ADA accessible, that's
Yes.
like if you're in a wheelchair or walker, it's designed to allow you to
Yes.
easily access it.
Yes,
Okay.
so the American Disabilities Act requires certain ramp sizes and
It's
configurations.
very inclusive.
Yes, an inclusive experience.
Uh-huh.
The hike and bike trail along the railroad in the Center Point easement is going to connect down to San Felipe in Highland Village area and come all the way up into Memorial Park and then eventually over I-10 and up into the Heights area.
What I love about the city of Houston is that the bayous run everywhere, and they've created trails that really interconnect.
Exactly.
So you can come from the heights and go into the park area.
Right. Yeah, so Fritz, that is exactly what Arthur Coley had in mind in the 1920s.
Oh.
So that park plan is now being realized through the Bayou Greenways Initiative.
It's so impressive.
If you go to the next slide, you can see some of the images of Eastern Glades. Like I said, it has, it's basically at the eastern side of the park. What we've done is created the access of the old Camp Logan entrance and celebrated that whole history of the park, bringing people into this large lawn space with social pathways through native habitat and a very large promenade kind of walkway around the side. So if you were to come into the parking lot, you could easily access that promenade from all of the parking lot locations and then loop around and come to the eastern terrace, look out over the lake. And the whole system is part of a stormwater infrastructure, a green stormwater infrastructure system. The irrigation water is sourced from the lake. We have rain gardens and bioswales and the lake to clean the water before it gets to Buffalo Bayou.
And so for like say senior groups coming from communities, the bus could just pull up and everybody can get out and they could just immediately enjoy it.
Yes, absolutely. If you go to the next slide, you can see one of the 3 pavilions. This is one of the larger pavilions. Each of them have fireplaces with wood-burning fireplace. And we'll have tables that are sort of mobile or relocatable for any group size.
Now, do you have to reserve these, or is it open to the community?
It's open to the community, but if you do want to reserve it and make sure that you have it available, then then reservations are definitely encouraged. If you go to the next slide, you can see sort of what I call the heart of Memorial Park.
Yes.
It's a wetland, it's a 2-acre natural wetland that's bound by a geologic fault line where the land has actually sort of displaced itself enough to hold water in this location.
Wow.
And we have a boardwalk system that gets you right up against this fault line and right up against the wetland where you can gaze out at these snags, these dead trees that we leave in the wetland that are ideal locations for the birds to perch and forage. So if you go to the next slide, we're basically getting into the land bridge. This is the large...
What a unique concept. That's just incredible.
Right, so we'll have 2 major tunnel segments and 2 large mounds over Memorial Drive, all ADA compliant, all compliant with all disabilities and abilities, and a prairie complex, a coastal prairie complex being developed.
So over the bridge, it's more like prairie?
Yes, so it'll be sort of a savanna, grassland, prairie. We do have forested edges along the tunnel tops, just to sort of keep the people away from the tunnels. But many opportunities for exercise and enjoyment and strolling and bird watching.
And not having to worry about crossing the street.
Alright, so if you go to the next slide, you can see those
Yes.
giant steps that we're creating up and over Memorial Drive. And then if you go to the next slide, an overview shows, how we'll have pathways that are easily accessible over both the mounds, and then the main trail going from the east side of Memorial Park all the way to the 610 loop is going to continue through this project. So that main hiking bike trail that's east-west that people use quite frequently continues on through that project. One thing to note here is that we've created these two mounds and broke that experience in the middle to allow wildlife corridor in a streamway that goes under Memorial Drive.
Oh, okay.
And then the next slide, I'll show just adjacent to the Land Bridge and Prairie project is the running complex. The building that's shown here in the bottoms of the slide has been there for quite some time. It was built in 2014 as the running trail center. It is the Cullen Running Trail Center, which is kind of the headquarters for Memorial Park Conservancy. We have our offices, visitor center, showers in that location that you can rent. And then we're building that out to a full running complex with a timing track in the back. And it'll be just kind of wide open for people to use.
Now I see you have this this other trail. I'm sorry. It's like an inner running track. Do you have a name for that?
Timing track.
Timing track. So
Right.
would that incorporate like competitions with the high schools and people?
Yes, it could.
Yeah. Okay.
We had, in terms of design, we incorporated their requests and thoughts about how to make it most usable for colleges, high schools. They'll have some bleacher type of facilities as well.
And the same goes for like the golf course. Like I think I've heard they're going to move is it the Shell? US?
Yes. So the Houston Open is going to be there in November. And part of that, the Astros Foundation has built a first tee facility for teaching underserved kids how to play golf.
Wonderful. That's awesome.
If you go to the next slide, you can see Memorial Groves. I talked about Camp Logan and the history of Memorial Park. We have in the park some of the foundations from the World War I training camp. Basically the old showers and bathhouses for the soldiers. And that's all in the Memorial Groves area along the railroad tracks. What we'll be doing is creating sort of a contemplative, kind of very passive portion of the park in that location. And in the next slide, like I said, we had that devastating drought of 2011 and 2012 where we lost quite a few trees. We brought all that material to the back of the park and started a permanent composting facility to turn that material and those trees into soil. And it's rich in biology, and you can see on that slide on the left, the white sort of fibers are all of the fungi that are actively feeding the plants, feeding the animals, and feeding that whole soil's food web.
I really love how they repurpose all of this to heal the earth in that respect and just keep the park going with its originality.
Yes, definitely. And then the next slide, you can see our greenhouse facility. We have a very large greenhouse where we are propagating native plants to use back into the park and then partnering with other organizations to kind of create a native plant grow out for the region and really being a hub for native plant sources for the area. So There are some organizations that have been propagating some of their plants to sell at a annual bulb mart. For example, the Garden Club of Houston, which is a chapter of the Garden Club of America, they have been growing a tray of 9 native species that is kind of a kit to develop your own pocket prairie.
So you can do this right at in your own yard.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
And then the next slide basically is a list of some of our volunteer opportunities. We have many ways to get involved in the Memorial Park Conservancy. Anything from coming out to our greenhouse and helping there on a regular basis.
And you don't have to have experience. They have training
No.
programs that help you get into any area that you're interested in. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Look at that. Well, let me ask you a few questions.
Do you want to go to the next slide?
Yes. So, Carolyn, that's amazing. I look forward to this. I love the outdoors. I love biking. Now, for seniors that come through, I'm sure safety and also the heat are going to be 2 factors. So tell me a little bit about, it sounds like the trails have a lot of shade, right? And these are all guided trails by volunteers or trained personnel.
Yeah, we're working on that program to get
In the future,
more people out into the park to assist with wayfinding. We're putting out signs and 911 markers in some of our remote trails so that if there was an incident, you could call that number and then they would be able to exactly locate where you are.
Oh, that's great. And what about restrooms? Because you know, seniors like to they have to use the restrooms. So.
Well, that's the great thing about our Eastern Glades project. It's the first basic project out of the master plan. It's a 100-acre park within the park that we call it. It's a contained kind of full experience where you're out in many different habitats and that whole experience with the history of the park. And we have these beautiful restroom facilities there. We have those 3 pavilions. So it's quite a gift to the city to bring that to the landscape. And
you did mention in passing about the food trucks and like a court. Where's that going to be?
Yeah, so right adjacent to the one pavilion that I was showing you in the slide, there is a food truck. It's called our Live Oak Court. It's where we have these beautiful live oak trees, lots of shade, and we'll have food trucks coming in every single day to just sort of be there for refreshments.
Well, that's a big attraction because you run into a big park, you want to have drinks and food available. So what a perfect setup, and your pavilions.
Yes, right.
Now you were talking about they have like fire pits at these pavilions, but that's the only place that you can really utilize a fire.
There are 5 also separate picnic pads that are not covered that have the rings, the campfire rings. And then of course the picnic loop, which is on the south side of the park, where many of our sort of picnicking and sort of just general use of the park has been historically, that's all going to stay open. And there's 17 or 20 different picnicking areas there that all have campfire pits.
Well, this is an excellent presentation. If an individual would like more information, do they have a website specifically for Memorial Park Conservancy?
Yes, so it's memorialparkconservancy.org. So just log into our website. There's a location where you can say how to visit, what to see, how to support us. We are a nonprofit organization.
Yes.
And part of this build out of the master plan requires us to bring a certain amount of money to that whole project.
Excellent. Yeah. Also, I'd like to ask, so given that we're in a pandemic, what are the restrictions at this point in the park? Is the visitor center, is that open?
The visitor center is not open. The restroom facilities are not either.
Okay.
So we have to plan ahead on that. We have not put out any of the tables in the new facility yet. We have those in storage waiting for the pandemic to pass. So just, be safe, but enjoy it. And
so at this point, it's the Heinz Lake is
Right.
open, so people can walk along that area safely, no problem, and that's the beginning of something really amazing. So check out Memorial Park and go to their website for more information. We thank Carolyn White, not only serving on the board for Great Age Movement. We want seniors to be in the park, and as we move through this pandemic, there's going to be lots of activities that everyone can enjoy. Stay tuned for our do-it-yourself project using native plants with Carolyn. Howdy, we're back, and we're just going to do a very special project with Carolyn, and she's going to lead the way.
Great. So as I mentioned before, we have a native coastal prairie habitat throughout the region and remnants of it in Memorial Park. This plant is a liatris. It's a coastal gay feather, which is a beautiful plant that blooms in August in that time period.
Did you say this is in the prairie or along the bayou?
The prairie.
Oh, prairie.
It's a grassland forb that grows a shoot annually. It comes up out of the stalk, and it has some nice grassland or grassy kind of leaves on the bottom. But this main stalk comes out every year and displays this beautiful purple flower at the top. So I thought I'd just talk a little bit about how to pot up a plant, and that's what we call bumping up the plant. Basically, this you can see has grown into the pot very rigorously, and the roots are kind of coming out of the bottom, so it's ready to grow up into a larger plant species. And what we're trying to do is just promote that root growth, so that we'll have more vigorous plants. And at that time, when you do the bump up, you can also separate out the 2 or 3 of the different plants and kind of expand and give some to your friends.
Now, is this a mature size?
Yes, so this is fairly mature. I mean, they grow a little bit larger as they're out in nature and able to kind of get a bigger root system. But it is a fairly delicate and low-growing plant in general. And we mix those in our kind of prairie restoration with other grasses, the Gulf muley grass, the brown seed paspalum grass, many other sort of grassland species, as well as other flowering plants like Texas coneflower, which is beautiful as well.
And then this is the soil you were talking about from the bio cycle, right?
Right. So this is a little bit of a coarser kind of soil than you typically would see. We've kind of left some of the mulch in here. I sort of grabbed this from our biocycle just to demonstrate what we typically use. And we would screen out some of this, but you can see a lot of the sort of white growth of those fungal matter in there. So what I've done is sort of filled up this pot about halfway, and given sort of a base for the plants that we're going to put in here. And what I'll do here is just show you how we pop the plant out of this existing pot and just really kind of grab it.
I always wonder how gentle to be with the roots when you're trying to separate them.
Yeah, what you want to do is sort of have it in your hand, and it's barely moist, obviously, and then break up some of these roots on the side just with your finger, just so that the roots don't just continually grow around and round in a circle. Yeah. That's pretty important for most plants, especially trees and shrubs. because that circling of the roots can end up really inhibiting its.
So mainly
growth.
just at the bottom of it is what you have to loosen up.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so what I'll do is kind of set it. I'll set this one here, and then we'll look a little bit more in detail on the other one, and show you sort of what this plant is all about. It's so again, we're breaking up this pot, this plant, and then I'm going to open it up and show you too the kind of plant it is. It's almost like an onion in a way. It has a bulb at the bottom, and the roots are, coming out of that one sort of almost tuber-like growth. So that's where you can say this is an individual plant. If I wanted to plant this separately and then give it to a friend, I could do that.
Got it.
So we'll put those all kind of back down in here and break up some of that soil.
What do you think about, I know people told me to put rocks in the bottom of my pot just so that water can circulate a little bit better and the roots don't get too saturated. Is that?
Yes, that's fine to do. Because many of these plants, they don't want to really sit in a lot of water.
Yes.
And make sure that your drainage is fairly good. So then what we're doing now is just sort of covering up those roots with the additional soil and filling it in a little bit. And we could have separated them out a little, but kind of clumped them all together. It's fine. And then just push down and make sure they're well rooted in as you go. And then we would water it a little bit at the beginning and get it on its way.
So how much exposure on the surface of where the substrate meets, like you see the individual bodies, do you need to cover it a certain number of inches above the actual surface?
Yeah, you want to just keep that same surface that you had in the previous pot, not cover too much over on top of it. So.
And this is direct sunlight.
Yeah, this plant likes a lot of sunlight. It's a grassland species, and of course this one kind of broke in transit as I brought it over here. So, if you were to just cut that off, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the purple gay feather, coastal gay feather liasis plant.
Beautiful. And natural.
Yes,
and native.
And native.
Yes.
So
Very
think about growing out your own pocket prairie. They're very popular, and if you Google that, you can find that more.
And so for those that maybe don't have the wonderful rich soil from Memorial Park, what could they do? Like Home Depot's about a bag.
Yeah.
Just
potting soil is
potting
fine.
soil, yeah.
And it doesn't have to have any nutrients or any sort of fertilizers in it at all.
So you can just leave it outside and it kind of takes care of itself, maybe water it every now and then if it's too hot.
Yes.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, Carol, this is quite amazing. Please feel free to review this video, which will be available on Great Age Movement's Facebook page, as well as the Health Museum as it's live as we speak. Check out Memorial Park Conservancy at their website, which is
memorialparkconservancy.org.
That's right. We are so lucky to have this amazing gem in our city. And watch out, New York, because we're 2.5 times the size. So we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you again for watching our live stream show. We look forward to seeing you next Saturday at 10 a.m. live on the Health Museum's Facebook page. Have a great weekend and enjoy our parks here in Houston. Thank you.